So it is the early hours of the 15th of February 2018. There's a lot going on in the news, so I'll just briefly cover a few of the things that have been going on and then come to the main point of the video. Been watching the Winter Olympics, of course, that's an ongoing thing. I'm watching the Alpine events right now. Um, it's good for escapism because there's always the news can be very depressing, and certainly the issues I'm going to be raising in this video are. So I think the Olympics is a good bit of escapism, just watching the events. In Zimbabwe, there's been the sad news that Morgan Shangarai has passed away. He was 65. He was well known outside the country for his tireless work on human rights and democracy. And he served in a power sharing agreement with Mugabe as Prime Minister of Zimbabwe. So that's a big blow to Zimbabwe's democracy. Morgan Tsvangirai was a great man, a brave man, and his legacy will live on. In neighbouring South Africa, Jacob Zuma has stepped down with the ongoing corruption allegations there. So I assume Cyril Ramaphosa will take over as ANC leader and presumably president. So big developments in South Africa. But it's what's just happened in the United States that I want to come to with this video, and that is yet another mass shooting. I'm going to try and keep this video under 10 minutes as much as possible. I just want to say something because it seems to be a perpetual, never-ending cycle of madness. So what do we know? At least 17 people have died at the school shooting in Parkland, Florida. And unusually, the gunman's been apprehended. They usually either take their own lives or they're shot by law enforcement. On this occasion, he's been taken alive. He's been named as 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz. That's what the initial reports are saying. What's caused this, what's prompted him to do this, who knows? He's answering questions, and apparently he'll be making a court appearance as early as this morning. But 17 people dead, presumably young students. It's certainly one of the worst school shootings. It's worse than Columbine. And apparently this is the 19th mass shooting in the United States this year. And we're still in February. It's got to the point where only major incidents are even given significant coverage. Not so long ago, there was two mass shootings in Pennsylvania, i.e. involving multiple fatalities, that barely even made the news. I only saw it because it came up on internet news. It wasn't even on the main broadcast. I think it was Yahoo News or something. In the last year and a half, there's been the Orlando nightclub shooting. There's been the Las Vegas strip shooting, the Sutherland Springs shooting in Texas, and now this. All major incidents, and all four of those rank in the top 10, 15 mass shootings of all time in the United States. This is clearly not a normal situation. There's a few things I want to say as a disclaimer. I am an outsider, and it's not for me to tell Americans how to feel about this, but Americans are diverse people. You can't say Americans are this, Americans are that. They're diverse people, and I sense that a lot of Americans are fed up with this, and they're as exasperated as outsiders are. But of course, it's impacting them because any day they could go to their place of work or their school, and there could be a mass shooting. This is not a normal situation. And there's clearly, people say it shouldn't be politicized, but there are clearly different attitudes out there. Governor Scott, to me, his attitude was just typical of Republican denial. He said, we should offer prayers, and my thoughts go out to the loved ones, and now is not the time to talk about it. When the hell is the time? It just, and he claimed that he couldn't understand how this had happened, as if it's some sort of mystery, as if this is a new thing. I mean, his state has seen two mass shootings on that scale in less than 2 years. And he's acting like it's news, like it's something out of the blue. Personally, I feel Senator, I believe his name is Senator Murphy, a Democratic senator from Connecticut, got the atmosphere far more accurate. That this is not happening anywhere else in the world. Well, at least not in developed countries. You may get other countries that are more dangerous than the States in overall crime, Honduras, South Africa, Brazil, but among developed countries, developed Western democracies, the US it is unique. This simply does not happen in Canada or Germany or Japan or Britain or Australia in the same way. It just doesn't. I mean, to put things in context, the last time Australia had a mass shooting, 1996. The last time we had one in the UK, 2010. And because it's so rare, when it does happen, it's almost always in rural areas, and it's a big, big story. In Australia, after the Tasmania mass shooting in 1996, they took the issue as a major situation that needed to be challenged. In the States, it is always the same thing. Let's offer our prayers and condolences. It's awful, and then it just goes back to normal. I don't think it's. I think there are Republicans who know that it's a problem, and I think there's many gun owners who know it's a problem. But the sort of excuses that the gun lobby uses, oh, it's a mental health issue, and the point is, every country has people with mental health problems. Not every country has this issue. I think how you can say that guns are not part of the equation. It's just beyond reason. This is not about being anti-guns, period, because I understand that the United States has parts of the country that are remote. I understand farmers need guns to protect the livestock. I understand if you're living in you know, rural Montana, it's very different from living in a big city. But this situation is because the gun lobby, what angers me is they always blame everyone else or everything else except for guns. So let's say, oh, it was gun-free zone. That's why it happened. So many of their claims are just utter nonsense. One of them is, oh well, if every student and teacher was armed, this wouldn't happen. There's no evidence for that, but it goes against reason because even if they were armed, regular citizens are not elite soldiers. You can't expect a teacher or a student to train like a Navy SEAL. It's crazy. So the logic of the gun lobby I find utterly infuriating and utterly perplexing. And the only summary, the only I can't even get my words out because it's so perplexing. The only way I can conclude that is they really do care more about the Second Amendment than the lives of their fellow citizens because they treat the Second Amendment like they worship it. It's more important than anything in their thinking. These are the people who were talking about stocking up because Obama's going to take away your guns, or if there's any gun control, oh, that's socialism. But here's the crazy thing: they say things like guns don't kill people; people kill people. That's utter nonsense. Guns are designed to kill. Yes, people can kill without guns, but you add guns to the equation, it clearly increases the likelihood that people will be killed with guns. I mean, they make these stupid analogies with cars. Oh, well, what about the number of people who die in road accidents? That's different. Cars are primarily a form of transport, and there has been major safety improvements with vehicles. Guns are primarily designed to kill. That is their purpose. So saying that guns are just inanimate objects is nonsense because there's all sorts of situations. If it gets into a child's hands, how do you bring that analogy into that? If a child accidentally fires it, and there has been many tragic cases where children have shot relatives by mistake because some reckless adult has left it lying around. It's just so crazy that this goes on and on and on. And I've enormous respect for those Americans who are trying to do something about this, but it must be so frustrating to see the same attitudes over and over and over again from people who have this fixation on the Second Amendment, and they will stubbornly not accept there is a problem. And I have to say, from a British perspective, for President Trump to lecture us on terrorism, one reason that bothered a lot of Britons is they're thinking, well, you've got this chronic problem with gun violence. Here's the thing, from my perspective, yeah, we do have a problem with Islamist terrorism. And I've always been upfront about that. I've always said, yeah, it's a real problem. We need to tackle it. But that doesn't change the fact that America, just because it doesn't have the same level of problems with. Actually, that's another thing. The average gun owner seems to think there is a greater threat from Islamism in America than there is from gun violence. Now, the statistics speak for themselves. Islamism is a plague on the world. I've been very outspoken in how I feel about that. But in the United States, you are far, far, far more likely to die in a mass shooting than you are from an Islamist terrorist attack, with the one obvious big exception being 9/11. But that was more an exception than the rule. Um, I mean, 9/11's been multiplied many times over in terms of the number of people who've died from gun homicides that are preventable. I don't think you'll ever have a situation where it's totally avoidable. I'm realistic enough to know that isn't going to happen, but clearly more can be done. I mean, okay, so in this situation, apparently the guy had background checks. Okay, well, they needed to go further because apparently, according to classmates, he was professing an obsession with guns online. Now, to me, that would be a warning sign. I think gun dealers should have to look at that as well. Look at someone's. I think background checks should be for it. People say, "Oh, what about civil liberties?" But what about the liberty to live life in safety? You know, away from the threat of gun violence. Are you saying that's a price worth paying? I don't know that it is. It may mean more paperwork. It may mean waiting a bit longer to get your firearm. But if you're such a gun nut that you're more bothered about doing a bit of paperwork than the greater good, then I would say there's something wrong with you. You know, if you buy a car or if you buy a house, I mean, I assume it's not a straightforward process. There are things to go through. Why should a gun be any different? Clearly, it should be. I mean, clearly, it should be taken a lot more seriously than it is. I think the issue now is that the background checks don't go far enough. And for Governor Scott to say it's perplexing, or I don't know how this is, he's firmly on in the camp of the gun lobby, so no wonder he's given that attitude. Trump and Pence aren't going to do a damn thing. They're going to say how awful it is, and we send out our condolences. Then it'll be back to normal. So I understand the frustration of the Democrats. And people say it shouldn't be politicized, but frankly, from my perspective, the Democrats are doing a lot more than the Republican colleagues. There are some Republicans, to be fair, that recognize it's a problem, but they're in a minority. And because the Republicans control the House and Senate, if it's a mistake, and then Democrats have their hands tied. But this is also, it's not about gun owners versus non-gun owners. There's many gun owners know full well this is a problem. But I just get so frustrated with the nonsense that the gun lobby comes out with. Because pretty much every claim that they come out with can be debunked. Oh, if they had guns, it wouldn't have happened. It happened in the gun-free zone. Well, why is it a gun-free zone? Because the problem of mass shootings is so profound. You know, you get mass shootings in states that have far more lax gun laws than other states. So I don't think that really indicates anything. This idea that I mean, I come from a teaching background. I imagine a lot of teachers would hate the idea that their school, that their classroom becomes like a military barracks. And to actually suggest that that should be the solution. I mean, look at the Vegas shooting. Apparently, the hotel had no firearms policy, but they did not implement it. So clearly, there is a lot of things in each case that are being missed out. Why did they not implement it? Why did they not check the guy's bags? Why not? It's just so frustrating and so tragic and so hard to understand. The stubborn attitude. And I think it's a siege mentality. I think it's paranoia. I think they think, as Charlton Heston said, from my cold dead hands. That is their mentality. Because they think any sort of gun control means taking away your guns. I can't think of a single example where a law abiding gun owner has had their firearms taken away. I can't think of a single example. And I'm just so grateful that I live in a country where this isn't such a profound problem. I'm not saying we're perfect. I'm not saying we never have gun violence, but just by comparison, and I'm not trying to point score here because I have a huge amount of respect for those Americans who are trying to do something. And I just think it's tragic and so stupid. So to conclude, I accept that you'll never have a situation where there's no gun violence. I do accept that. Even with all the legislation in the world, there will always be that situation. But the population discrepancy, people might say, well, there's a bigger population, but that still doesn't add up. If it was a population factor, okay, so let's say the US has 330 million people roughly. Japan has 125 million people. So in theory, Japan should have about a third of the number of gun homicides as the States have. So let's say the States have roughly 15,000 a year. Japan, therefore, should have about 5,000 a year, right? If you were working out in that sense. But we know that's not the case. Japan has less than 100 a year. So it just doesn't. All the excuses they come out with, in my opinion, are void. And it's just so. Hell, I'm frustrated and I'm not even living there. If I'd lost a loved one, I would be beyond angry. I would be beyond devastated. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Just, I think that if Sandy Hook doesn't change anything, and if people being gunned down like sitting ducks on the Las Vegas Strip doesn't change anything, I can't think of anything that will. And the crazy thing is, if it was any other public health crisis, which really is what this is, because American A&E departments deal with gunshots far more than their counterparts in other parts of the world. You just, if this was like a health pandemic, the same people who are worshipping the Second Amendment would be demanding that the government does something about it. If it was some sort of big pandemic, some sort of virus broke out, or if it was floods or a natural disaster, people would be demanding change. When it comes to gun violence, there's clearly two camps. One camp knows that there's a problem and they're trying to do something about it, and the other have their head in their sand. And sadly, it seems to be the latter camp that is prevailing. It's just, I find it staggering. And I know I've talked longer than I intended, but staggering.